everyone, and welcome to the green economy. Agriculture is a large portion of today's supply chains and is essential to everyday living for both businesses and consumers. Today we're exploring the role of agriculture in supply chains and how they benefit you. To investigate this topic, we're talking with two experts in the industry. Phoebe Gardner from Bardi, who you may remember from our circular economy episode earlier this season, and Angus Maftie from Actuary, who helps farmers manage their emissions and report into their supply chain. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us, Angus and Phoebe.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to be part of the panel.
Thank you. Well, let's start by delving into circular economy. What is it? How do you contribute to it?
I might jump in on this question. So, circular economy is about the concept of reuse. So, any material that comes into the economy ends up, instead of ending up in landfill, particularly for physical goods, it ends up being reused. So, not just recycled, but actually repurposed in a way or used more efficiently, so that all materials, once they've perhaps completed their original purpose for use, are recirculated back into the economy in another way. So at Bardi, what we do is we transform food waste, which obviously was once intended for human consumption or animal consumption or part of a food manufacturing process. And by feeding it to insects, we reuse that food waste to gather the nutrients and produce fertilizer and protein to go back into the food system. When we step back and look at that more broadly, it's really just about the concept of having the most sustainable types of products and economies possible, where there's a real incentive towards efficiency, and we're looking at the footprint of all the products in circulation.
So one of the main advantages of circular economy is turning waste into profit. Can you expand onto this?
It's a really exciting part of circular economy. I'd say the circular economy is relatively nascent, but we've seen some really big moves and improvements over the last decade, and there's been huge circular and recycling initiatives really that have been ongoing for probably the last 30 years now in most large industrialized cities when we think about cardboard going back into reuse. And what's exciting about the new opportunities here are that more businesses that aren't normally involved in waste management are looking at their waste streams or the outputs or residual parts of their supply chain or manufacturing and saying, how could we turn this waste, which is currently a cost center in our business, into a profit center by employing a new technology or partnering with another company to turn that waste stream into something that's actually valuable to someone else.
Can you tell us about the role of insetting and offsetting in the sector?
Yeah, I can probably jump in there. And I think this is the part where, the work that Phoebe and Bardi does sort of crosses with what we do at Actuary. So in the insetting and offsetting, it means different things to different people, but you're probably better off looking at, what's your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So scope 1 is obviously being used directly by your business. Scope 2 is, let's say something like your electricity use. And then scope 3 is, either your suppliers or in your supply chain, what are their emissions? And so you generally start with reductions. That's looking at your scope 1 and 2. Insets, when you encourage those in your supply chain to reduce their scope 1 and 2 emissions. And so you're having that reduction inset of your scope 3. And then the offset is, I think that's one most people are familiar with. You're buying a credit, you're buying whether it's biodiversity or carbon credits or units from some other, project or supplier who's created that credential. And so that's the general gist of it. And I think probably the part where we crossed over is, Bardi's creating a bunch of these credits around, reusing their waste. And then that can be, if that fertilizer is then being used on farm, that credit then gets attached to the food that gets produced on that farm. So we help the farmer there then communicate that either into their supply chain on how they've reduced their emissions there as well.
Okay. So why is it essential to understand your environmental footprint and how do you measure it?
Well, it is difficult to measure, that's for sure. But it is quite important, sticking with the focus of the farm, that's, where I'm mostly looking. a lot of having a great understanding of where your inputs and outputs, like how much fertilizer use you're going through, where that's being allocated, and what run-on effects that has onto the natural ecosystems. Is it like improving or degrading? Like the soil conditions there can really have an effect on the bottom line of that business, particularly over the long run. And one of the big focuses, I think, of agriculture and the industry of late is, how do you better manage or create better stewardship of your natural ecosystems around the farm? And that actually enhances the productivity and resilience of that farm to other, natural events. Like in Australia, drought's obviously a big one. So improving that, things like biodiversity or your soil carbon can have a dramatic effect in supporting a farm's resilience through tough times as well.
I'd love to add to that, because I also think the importance of understanding carbon footprint also enables really good data-driven decision-making in any business as well. More and more, there's regulatory frameworks that are coming into play that are asking businesses to disclose their overall carbon footprint. And so many businesses are looking at that now and saying, well, if we're going to have to disclose soon or in the future, and that's also what consumers are often wanting to see, data about the supply chain sustainability and sustainability initiatives that are in place. Without having that baseline or that footprint in the first place, it's really hard to make informed decisions. So it's really important work getting that initial data set in place. And I think there's a real advantage to businesses who take that on and get that baseline and start implementing new initiatives from a really data centric place, because when the frameworks come in for reporting, they'll just be so much further ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's giving a new lens besides just, let's say, the lines in the accounting system. You're getting a new lens to analyze how the business is actually performing. So in a lot of the cases where you find, let's say, massive, let's say carbon centers rather than a cost center, that, like Phoebe was saying before, that's an opportunity to potentially turn that into a revenue generating section of the business as well.
And it comes back to insetting and offsetting. Many companies are on a journey to become more sustainable and have more sustainable supply chains, and looking for ways to really achieve that. And insetting, where you're actually reducing the emissions in the supply chain through your initiatives, is a really great way to reduce costs if you would otherwise be purchasing credits to offset them. And so in combination, those two things can help achieve a net zero goal successfully for companies who have made those types of commitments. But it really sort of takes both, and a really strong understanding of what's really moving the needle.
And speaking of like accounting and that sort of area, that's a huge discussion topic at the moment. Businesses are looking into the financial side of green initiatives and investments. Can you talk about the financial advantages of ESG initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, on the what I really like about the sector where I am, particularly on farming, it's the big ones are footprint, and then also biodiversity or natural capital. And really having those things in line can, dramatically improve business. So things like, if you're making, if you can figure out how to make cuts in your use of fertilizer, you're dramatically reducing your nitrogen emissions, which is a big contributor to greenhouse emissions on farm. But then that also helps reduce the cost of operating the business. So if you're able to produce the same output, or maybe you've invested in improving your soil quality, you're getting potentially more yield with increased margins and having a lower impact, on the environment as well. And so, I mean, I'm really excited about my sector because all of those three things are, aligned together rather than them being a trade-off.
I think previously there was so often when a business would look to make a sustainable transition, it would be looked at as, oh, this is going to be more expensive and it costs more to be sustainable. But there's a real shift and genuine opportunity now, particularly in circular economy and transitioning your waste streams into profit centers, to engage with the technology that's out there to measure accurately and actually not only reduce operational costs, but also potentially maximize revenue. And businesses that are really taking advantage of these new technologies, systems, information, implementing well, are are hopefully going to be in a really good position in the future.
Yeah, and I think it's, the other part of the financial end is a lot of the large financial institutions are looking really, really closely at, what are their financed emissions. So the businesses and individuals that they give loans to, they're looking to reduce those. So, for instance, they'd be looking for insets inside of who are they actually lending to, and trying to create initiatives around that. And so there's some other advantages whereby a lot of, let's say, Australian financial institutions are starting to create, green or sustainability linked loans where you can get, below market or discounted to market rate lending facilities to then go invest in something like soil improvement, a carbon project, solar panels, and that thing of the like as well, because they view that as a long-term de-risking activity.
Yeah, risk management has a lot to do with it, and we've seen that tie in with finances a lot today. Thank you for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching The Green Economy. We hope you've learned something interesting. We'll see you all next time.